This is Gerardo Del Real along with my co-host, the witty, smart, world-famous Nick Hodge, and this is episode 2 of Bizarro World. Nick, how are you this afternoon?
That's a lot of superlatives. I'm feeling a little scared. I hope I can live up to them, but feeling good.
Well, I told everyone last week we were going to have smart and not so smart people on this podcast. If you're the smart guy, I'll let people do the math. But let's get to it. There was a lot that we talked about last week. We handed out some awards. We talked about women and equality and having an equal voice at the table. And I want to continue that discussion. But I think there were a couple of awards, one for sure that that we should definitely hand out in part 2. And then let's look forward here in 2019, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I know we skipped an award last week. I didn't say anything about it. I figured we'd come back to it, so let's do it.
Let's do it. So I hate the word best because that's so subjective. So I'm going to call it the most overachieving CEO award. We know how tough 2018 was for most junior resource companies. I think a lot of those companies are going to disappear this year if they act the way they did last year, because I don't believe we're going to have the same type of bear market that we had last year. I think we're in for a much better year, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But overachieving CEO for me has to be, for me, Warren Stanier from Nevada Sunrise Gold. This is a company that for much of 2018 had a market cap of anywhere between $2 and $5 million Canadian. And he was able to joint venture multiple projects that will see drilling. They retain 20% control of Kinsley Mountain with the operator Liberty Gold. That project will see some drilling this year in 2019. They maintained that joint venture in good standing. They were also able to roll in some new projects, some copper assets, some cobalt assets. And, you know, they just released a drill hole at a project in Nevada. We talked last week about the failure of Nevada to deliver good results. They hit a lot of smoke on a project near the past producing Big Mike project. It's called the Coronado project. And the bottom line is it looks like they could be on to a pretty significant copper, cobalt, gold discovery there. We'll know within the next quarter, but I'm going to give that award to Warren Stanier because, man, there were a lot of companies with much higher market caps that frankly didn't do shit last year but sit on their ass and collect checks. And Warren was able to joint venture projects, retain 100% ownership of a project that could be a discovery here soon. And not to mention, I'm hearing whispers that those water rights that were taken away essentially by Nevada may be reinstated soon. And if that's the case, I know there's got to be 2 or 3 buyers in the valley that need those water rights, and I can justify a market cap based on the water rights alone equivalent to the current market cap of Nevada Sunrise. So I'm going to give that one to Warren.
Those water rights would be nice. Like you say, they're worth as much as the company is right now. So yeah, the water rights getting done would be nice for Nevada Sunrise. When you asked me to jot down a couple names last week, Gerardo, it was easy. I wrote down, let me see how many names I wrote down. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 names. I'm only gonna pick one so we don't drag this on. And it's gonna be Hugh Agro at Revival Gold. And for a couple of reasons. One, I like the major pedigree. I think coming from a major instills a discipline and a way of doing things that is beneficial for junior mining companies. Some would call it parental guidance, which a lot of junior mining companies need. But I think Hugh brings that from Kinross to Revival Gold. And he did a good job last year of getting Arnett ready to drill. We just saw some results out of Arnett that were oxide that could lead to a decision to restart the project while they continue to grow the resource. And he's just on it, right? He's like some of the IR candidates that we discussed last week. He's always contextualizing the news for you. He's always making sure you have analyst reports about not just Revival Gold specifically, but the gold sector in general to help understand why it's due for revival and why he named the company Revival Gold. And he's at the conferences and he's talking with the people, the network that helped tell his company's story, and he's hosting well-organized site visits and having the right people there. And just generally interviews well, knows the space, and I think is doing a good job at reviving Revival.
I agree 100%. A couple of other points on Revival while we're at it. They've managed to do what Nevada Sunrise also managed to do during a tough year, which is keep the share structure relatively tight, right? I think each company has anywhere between 40 and 50 million shares outstanding. Again, they haven't been diluting the heck out of the share count, so that should be mentioned. The second thing that I'll mention for Hugh and the team at Revival is he's been able to put together one of the best boards in the junior space. I remember a time during the last bull market where that management team alone as a shell would justify the current market cap 2 million ounces of gold aside, right? And likely 3 by the end of 2019. So I know that Diane Garrett, who I recently had the pleasure of speaking with, is a non-executive chairman now. And this is someone who's had, serial success in the past. You mentioned parental guidance. I think it's funny because there's a lot of companies out there that are real shit shows right now. I think, and I'm going to say the name and then we'll talk about it a bit later, but I want to get into Prize Mining and the debacle over there and try to sort out that mess a little bit. But completely agree with you. Hugh Agro, Warren Stanier, Nevada Sunrise Gold, Revival Gold. I think each of those gentlemen should be commended and shareholders should be happy. Revival shares outperformed nearly every metric in the resource space, so kudos to them.
Well, and look, like you say, it translates to share price. Revival has warrants that are going to expire at the end of June that are 82% in the money right now. Those warrants are going to get taken down. That money's going to come in, testament to the execution, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, we may have just talked about 2 companies that we're expecting big things from, but let's talk about a couple of companies, a few companies that we're expecting big things from in 2019.
Revival's right on the list for reasons that I just covered talking about Hugh. We're going to update the resource. It's at 2 million ounces now. They're targeting 3 million ounces. I think we'll get it. Like I said, they just hit some oxide resource that could allow them to restart operations in the meantime. And it's still very, very cheap. So big things from Revival Gold. And then I'm going to throw a uranium name in there. The uranium price continues to be stuck below $30 a pound, but there's the Section 232 catalyst that's coming in. A Zarga uranium, AZZ, is well positioned for that with North America's highest grade in situ recovery project, Dewey Burdock, awaiting some permitting decisions and awaiting the resolution of some native issues that I believe will be done positively and could dovetail nicely with a Section 232 decision here from the Commerce Department and the President. So Azarga Uranium is another one I'm expecting a good year for.
Excellent. Before we move on, Nick, and before I give you a name, can you, for those that aren't familiar, can you explain why ISR projects are at the top of your list as far as companies that you like and companies that have these types of projects? Why is it important that ISR projects be in the portfolio mix for speculators in the uranium space?
Well, they're low cost and they're fast restart. So you have companies like UEC, for example, and Energy Fuels to some extent that just have idled projects, and they can come online much more quickly and with much lower capex. So if we do get either a bump in the uranium price that justifies a restart, or we get some sort of quota or price floor from Section 232, these assets can come back online quickly and therefore should be the receipt of investment love in the market as well.
I'll add one last point. The environmental footprint that these types of projects leave behind is much, much less than your traditional project. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Oh, you can stand on top of an ISR project and not even know that it's a mine. It's not a hole in the ground. It's just some pipes that stick up out of the ground here and there that send fluids down into the deposit. And so you don't even know you're looking at a mine. Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Excellent. My name, my pick, Ethos Gold. It's run by a gentleman by the name of Craig Roberts, ticker symbol ECC. market cap of approximately $13 million. They have two very interesting projects, and what I love about the projects is both of them will be tested this year. They have a vanadium project in BC that we'll see testing in the second half of this year. It's a relatively straightforward project. I encourage everyone to go to the website, because if the thickness that they're seeing in the preliminary trenches that they've done, if those are duplicated during the drilling, you can anticipate a pretty robust vanadium asset with very economic grades if the grades they're seeing right now hold up. So for a company with a $13 million market cap, that's a big shot on gold. The second project they have is a project called La Purísima in Mexico, and that is a straightforward heap leach type gold project that will also see drilling. They get to test that within the next couple of months. So it's going to be a 2019 that will have consistent news flow. And again, market cap of 13 million. Excellent share structure. I believe they have somewhere along 55 million shares outstanding, if I'm not mistaken. The company was founded by Gary Freeman, who passed suddenly recently. Gary was somebody that I know was friendly to you and was friendly to me, and frankly, earned and deserved a lot of goodwill in this space. So I expect big things from Ethos this year.
I heard in an interview some guy did with Craig recently that a Purisma is exciting because it's vein style gold that they know is there, but a very seasoned geologist thinks that there could be some disseminated gold in between the veins that could make it a bulk tonnage project or a surface mining project. So something to keep in mind as they drill.
Absolutely. And you know, the team that Craig's put together is an excellent team. You know, he's got people from the Pediment days, back in the days with Gary Freeman, Mel Herdrick. He's the gentleman that picked the project. He's familiar with Mexico. He knows these projects. The entire project is on private ranch land, so you don't have any of the ejido issues that you can sometimes experience in Mexico. So, yeah, fingers crossed. We know exploration is risky, but I think, again, you have two shots on gold, and I think both the vanadium and the gold space are going to be exciting in 2019.
Agreed.
Perfect. Let's talk gold. We're on the topic. What do you see moving forward, Nick? What do you expect out of 2019? I can't help but notice that we're getting a higher base here. 1290 seems to be the new low. Do you think that holds up? Do you think we go higher?
Well, we only go higher if we can hold 1300. You know that. I don't know if we do it. I don't want to get my hopes up. It's been so bad for 5 years that I don't want to risk another head fake similar to those we've seen in the uranium market. But yeah, things look good. I've seen more headlines about gold than I've seen in recent memory. The street even paraded out Jim Cramer last week so they could use the All That Glitters headline.
That worried me. I know that you and Brian London had an over-under on how many glitter headlines we were going to see. I saw you two on Twitter.
Yeah, well, Kramer was saying that everybody should have 10% of their retirement in gold, and so when you start to see mainstream headlines like that, it gets me excited a bit, and plus you're also seeing some headlines outside of just the normal ones that you see for gold, inflation and Fed and debt and things like that. You're actually seeing some things happening in the gold space that I know we'll talk about. I'm talking about the M&A and the consolidation that I think has people looking at the industry once again. When you get a $10 billion deal and two world's biggest gold producers created inside of 6 months, Bloomberg starts to write about that, and so that brings retail attention to the sector, which is ultimately going to be needed, right, to drive through that 1300 price target and take out 1350. It's not going to be us gold guys doing it by ourselves. We need new blood. And so when you start seeing the headlines like that, that's when new blood starts to come in. And so I'm excited. Look, we've taken off from 1220 in November to just about 1300 here. We've knocked on the door a couple of times, and it feels pretty good.
Who gets the better of that Newmont Gold Corp deal? Of course, the big deal, the news that was announced here recently. Who do you think got the best of that? There's been a lot of chatter. Everybody has an opinion, of course. What do you think about it? What do you think we'll see as a result? Any implications?
Yeah, I'm not really enough of a major guy to give you a smart opinion. I've read that some people who follow it think that Newmont overpaid. I've read that people still think it's going to be bloated old Newmont, and so Barrick, the new Barrick, is going to still be the stronger company. But look, I'm like I say, I'm not a major guy. Who benefits? I think the whole sector benefits for the reasons I just said. It's got people interested in gold deal making again. It's got people talking about gold again, and one thing I think that's escaped in a large part the discussion in these deals is it's putting a spotlight a bit on how Canadians have run their gold companies over the past call it couple of decades. I've seen a couple of articles come out of Canadian newspapers like the Globe and Mail lamenting the fact that the Barrick office in Toronto is de facto closing and has laid off all these people, and they're worried that the same is going to happen for Goldcorp. But it's like, look what's happened recently not recently, but a downward spiral over decades with Canadian resource companies and how they're regulated and some of the things that go on, which we're going to talk about in a second. It's, I don't know if they should be lamenting. I think they should be getting their asses in gear and correcting the regulatory framework and how their resource companies are run. And a blueprint for that is some of the things we're seeing with Paulson and the Shareholders Gold Council and what he recently did with Detour. And so I know I didn't answer your question, Gerardo, but there's a lot of winners.
I asked you all that just to give you my dumb opinion, to be perfectly honest with you, Nick. Would you like my dumb opinion, my quick take on that?
Sure.
The bankers win.
Right? Oh, of course, they always win.
The bankers win. It's going to be
and the lawyers.
And the lawyers. It's going to be an orgy of fees. That's who wins. The bottom line is, somebody on Twitter earlier asked me what I thought, and I said, look, they asked if I thought that Newmont overpaid, and I said, well, we'll know soon by which assets get sold and at what price, right?
Yeah, they're going to have to shed some assets. Barrick has already started doing that. They backed out of some JVs. That's good for the corporate structure, and it's good for guys like you and I and people who invest in mid-tiers and juniors, because there's going to be a quality management team like Revival that comes along and scoops up the next bear track, and that's going to be an exciting and investment story for mid-tiers and juniors. So I'm excited to see what assets they shed, who picks them up, and how this all works out.
You touched on, and it's a perfect segue, the fact that you feel these companies need to get off their asses and get their house in order, right? We know that a large reason for the mergers that are happening now and the fact that there's been a lack of M&A up until recently has been the fact that the last bull market enabled a whole bunch of drunks to misallocate shareholder capital, overpay for assets, and then have to write them off at pennies on the dollar multiple years later. So I hope that's not the case this time around. You mentioned that you don't dabble too much with the majors. Let's talk about some juniors. There's been some fuckery recently that just gets under my skin a little bit, and we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't call it out. I'm going to start with prize mining. I know everybody recently that I've spoken with publicly has outlined what happened. They don't want to mention the name for whatever reason, but the bottom line is this: for people that are listening, shareholders, speculators in the space, this is among the riskiest sectors in all of the investment and speculative world, right? We can agree on that. Most drills will not hit economic mineralization. Many times when they do, it'll be in unfriendly jurisdictions. There's a lot of inherent risk that comes with exploration to start off with. The second part of that is there's many companies that mean well, are good people, have talented geologists, can't maintain a share structure, and will dilute any opportunity for you to make money in the company. Now, assuming all those things don't happen, you have a story like Prize Mining, okay? In June, they were supposed to raise $2 million. They did that. Then they were supposed to raise $4 million. They did that as well. They not only raised the 4 million, they went to 8 million. So far, so good, right? Bear market, they were able to raise $8 million. You could probably go out and roll in some pretty accretive assets. You have cash to explore with. All looks good for the most part up until that point. Until you read, and kudos to them for disclosing it, that 85% of the $6.5 million, the minimum proceeds from the financing, would be allocated to marketing and promos and corporate development and financial advisory services and so on and so on. Basically everything but exploration. This was back in June. When that isn't highlighted publicly, and newsletter writers, we write newsletters, you write them, I write them. When you recommend a company that's going to dedicate 85% of its budget to marketing and advertising, what does that tell you about the company? What should that tell you? And what should that tell you about the people that took the money?
It's a paper pump job.
It's a paper pump job. And again, it's not just the company that's at fault here. There were a lot of people in the space that took the money. Let's be perfectly clear and honest about that. That, you know, whether they liked the asset or not, it was an interesting asset, the one they said they were going to develop. The minute that you hear that 85% of the money raised from shareholders was going to be spent on marketing, essentially, shouldn't that have been enough to tell people, you know what, I'm going to back away, I was wrong, and no harm, no foul, right?
Well, the whole thing has been interesting, and it's not just Prize Mining that has done this, although this case has been well documented, and now the regulators in Alberta are looking into it and have laid the case out pretty well. This goes even to the Bridgemark thing that's opened up recently. We can put a link up if people want to read about that. But it in a nutshell, Gerardo, you said it nicely. But basically, these companies are raising money and they're using that money to pay websites and publishing outfits to tout the stock instead of using that money to grow resources or organically, like a resource company should be doing. And it goes on much more widespread, I think, than anybody knows. And hopefully with these, in fact, I think the Prize Mining guy was due in court this week, Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see what happens.
You want to hear something funny, not funny, Nick?
Sure.
The Prize Mining guy was due in court this week, and he also will be the guest of honor, I believe, at the UBC Department of Mining dinner on the 26th. So if you want to go and listen to the gentleman talk about, you know, how he's managed to get himself in this situation. I believe it's January the 26th. The reception's at 6. You got to dress snazzy. The dinner's at 7. It's at the Four Seasons Hotel in Vancouver, everyone. I think tickets are like $75 or something like that. So sorry to interrupt. I just thought that was funny, not funny.
No, I mean, that's exactly it. It's good to get these stories out in the open. It's good to educate investors about how they work and what to look for. And here's a funny anecdote. It's well, funny, not funny. It's good not to do business with those people ever again, right? Stop feeding the animals. That's the thing you say when you find stories like this. And so, funny enough, I had a slide deck come across my deck 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was a cannabis company trying to raise $5-7 million doing business in Israel. So I took the call, went through the slide deck, did the whole thing. Well, on the call, it comes out that somebody that's involved in this cannabis deal is part of an IR firm that was also working with Prize Mining. And so for a guy like me, I don't know how other people vet companies, but it's very much about the people for me. And so I've got this Prize Mining thing in my head. I'm looking at this cannabis company that now has a tangential connection to Prize Mining, and I just happened to lose the slide deck in the email and never respond to that gentleman again. And that's how it goes.
There's that old farmer saying, right? If you roll in the mud with the pigs, you're going to get dirty.
Yep.
And you said I said that nicely earlier. I don't think they think so, but that's kind of beyond the point, right? Because they have a cease trade order, so that is what it is. Any other recent examples of something that's ticked you off a little bit?
I see them all the time. One I put on the Twitter sphere this week was a company called Adamera Resources. This is something they've done time and time again. They drill a hole, they put out a press release ogling how good the core looks. This looks like the high grade core we drilled before. It looks really promising. We really like this core. And then this was back in, I think, October. They sent this press release out. Stock goes up, no assays yet. Oh, and then what happens this week? Assays come out. Oh, they're not high grade, by the way. And the stock gets cut in half by more than 50%. And I think that's total fucking bullshit.
I'm going to agree with you. I think that's total fucking bullshit too. And just to be clear, I don't know either of, these people from these companies personally. Maybe they're great people. Maybe they're awesome to their husbands and wives and to their kids. But when it comes to their business practices, these two recent examples just beg to put a spotlight on. And again, I don't think we would be doing our job as, having a platform to say something where a couple of people tune in every week. So anyway, that's that. You mentioned Azarga. You mentioned uranium. We talked about ISR assets. What do you think about uranium? I know that, something that's big here in the U.S. is we're all awaiting the 232 decision, which I believe will end up being a beneficial one with producers and near-term producers that have assets in the U.S., low-cost assets. What are your thoughts on uranium for 2019? I know that some of the smartest people in the space have been calling for bull markets for 5 or 6 years. I actually think we get one this year. Thoughts?
We need the utilities. That's basically what it's come down to. Everything else is in place. The price is low enough that nobody's coming online. We don't have to go through it all because a lot of people know the main uranium story. Kazatomprom, China building out, the rest of the world building out, yada yada. But it's the utilities. Until the utilities put pen to paper and start buying more uranium, which they're going to have to do eventually, we're not going to get that bull market. And those smart people you say calling for a bull market expect that in 2019 to 2021. And you know what? The years are going faster as ever. So 2019, 2021, I don't care as long as I get a uranium bull market. But it's tough. It's tough to get excited about when I get a daily price update about uranium and it's remained unchanged for days and days at a time.
Shout out to Dennis Higgs. Are you getting Dennis's price updates as well? Shout out to Dennis Higgs.
And the inspirational cartoons, which I actually like more than the uranium price some days. But to see that email come in day after day, 2888 unchanged, 2888 unchanged, 2888 unchanged. That dampens the excitement a bit. But that said, 232 is exciting. There's exciting projects that you and I follow and are invested in, including UEC and Azarga and Sky Harbor and Fission and ALX.
Don't give all the names, damn it. They're never going to subscribe to any of our newsletters, Nick. Keep a couple.
And others. And so I think that we'll get back to a place where good news is being rewarded in the market once again. So come on, Fission, get your study out, damn it.
I like it. We're about a month overdue, although I did see something recently that said it would be out in 2 weeks' time, and I think that was 3 days ago. So January, hopefully, right?
Yep.
All right. What other commodities are on your radar?
Oh, man, I kind of want to talk cryptos and cobalt. You know me, Gerardo. I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none, so I can talk for 30 seconds about anything and sound kind of smart. But let's talk about cobalt for 1 second. Just quickly want to touch on it because it was really, really hot in 2017, and then it got sort of pushed out of the...
Yeah, so was R. Kelly, but I digress. Sorry.
It's the remix to Ignition. Anyway...
Hashtag me too. R. Kelly is canceled for everybody listening. Yeah, I'll be in Chicago for the Cubs convention the next couple of days, and I hope to bump into Mr. Kelly. I think he's a sick fuck. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
I haven't seen the documentary, but the articles I've read over the years, I would have to agree with you. What are we talking about? We're talking about cobalt. So it got pushed out of the way last year by vanadium, but the story really didn't go away. We still need cobalt to make these batteries for what we're calling the electrification of everything. And as we know, the cobalt doesn't really come from nice places, primarily from the DRC or the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they are just mired in some crooked elections. And we know that they use dirty child labor practices to get this cobalt, and so we know that cobalt has to come from another place. And anyway, nobody's really been talking about cobalt, and the stocks can't get any traction. But recently we saw a cobalt heist. We've seen some people starting to steal cobalt from ports. And so when you see people, you remember when people were stealing copper back in the day when copper was worth stealing, that portends a bull market. And I just don't want anybody to forget about cobalt. I'm not exactly sure where it's all going to come from yet, but I know that the story isn't going away, especially because, and the last thing I'll mention is about cobalt is a mentor of ours shared an article the other day that the founder of Blackwater has put down, I think, over $100 million or something to start a cobalt fund or company. And this is important. I say it's important for this reason. If you don't know anything about Blackwater, it's basically our private army. It's what we use to fight the Iraq War. Blackwater is the company we paid to torture people. It got a lot of headlines when George W. was in office. And so it just seems to me that if you got the head of Blackwater, somebody that likely knows a lot of state secrets, has been to war, knows why we fight wars, knows about critical inputs and what the country likes and needs to defend. And this guy's not starting an oil fund. He's not starting a rare earth fund. He's not starting a hemp farm. He's not starting a crypto mining business, but he's starting a cobalt thing. And so just a couple ding-dings went off in my brain when I saw that. Anyway, cobalt.
You think anybody's going to try to steal Mr. Prince's cobalt?
I don't know. He can certainly defend it.
Hashtag Eric Prince, hashtag Blackwater. Look that up. Yeah, make for some good reading. Yeah, I remember George W. getting a lot of criticism because he was torturing people. So, all right, cryptos. Let's talk cryptos. All the gurus are gone. We touched on it last week. We said they'd be back at 15,000. Let's talk cryptos. What do you think, Nick? What do you see? Are there better days coming? I mean, it's getting pretty dire out there.
Again, just a quick 30-second snippet from me because I don't know anything about anything really, but I am invested in a company that leases some data center space to crypto miners, and as are you, Gerardo. And we've heard from them recently that the crypto miners that were leasing data space are bowing out of their leases. And not only are they bowing out of their leases, they are leaving their mining equipment there when they go. So literally just throwing in the towel.
And we're not talking insignificant mining equipment, to be clear, everybody. We're talking millions of dollars. I won't say the company name. I am invested in it. I don't want what's going on to be attached to the company because it's not them doing it. But yes, they have had situations where millions of dollars of assets are literally being left behind. So continue. I just wanted to give some context there.
Well, and as a result of that, they're able to, since the company's defaulted on their lease, this company gets that mining equipment and can then mine with it. Well, they can't make money at current prices, even mining with free equipment. And crawl inside your contrarian brain for a minute and think about what that tells you. If someone gave you a free mine and mining equipment and you couldn't produce whatever commodity it was, zinc or nickel or gold or silver at the current commodity price, that would tell you that the price of the commodity was probably a bit too low. And so that's what I'm saying. If this company who is getting millions of dollars of crypto mining equipment for free can't turn a profit, then and not to mention just the crypto miners themselves walking away and leaving the equipment. That is contrarian bottom stuff. That is the things you see at the bottom. When you can't make money mining with free equipment, it's time to start buying. That's the blood in the street stuff. And so, I'm not a crypto bug, just like I'm not a gold bug, but I know a trend and a good investment when I see it. And so my little bullish spidey senses are going off with crypto at this point because I don't know how much lower it can get because same as uranium. No one can produce at these prices.
When, to be clear, we didn't mention the company name, but they are not just a company with exposure to crypto mining. Their primary business actually is data center co-location services that they provide. And so you mentioned the electrification of everything earlier, Nick. Can you explain briefly to people who aren't familiar with the term what that means? And then I'll try to tie it into these data centers, because I think there's a tsunami of business that's going to be headed this company's way.
Well, Nike just came out with a pair of sneakers that you have to plug in there. The electrification of everything. Done.
Yeah, and me being a Chicago kid, I grew up in Chicago. That took me back to the Future days. So I'm probably going to have to get a pair of those as soon as I get to Chicago.
You got to charge the sneakers. And so I won't be that Kurt. What we mean by the electrification of everything is the connectivity of everything and the powering of everything. So these sneakers are going to be internet connected, and they're going to have a battery. That battery is going to need natural resources to create. It's going to need electricity to charge them. It's going to need data capacity to analyze how many strides you're taking in a day and how much weight you're putting on the ball of your foot as opposed to the heel of your foot, and just translate that into every single device that you use on a daily basis. We've got internet connected toothbrushes and pens and you name it. And so that's it. It's the Internet of Things. It's the electrification of everything. And you can't do that without copper and nickel and zinc and cobalt and all the things that we invest in. And that's the electrification of everything.
And you can't do it without data centers that are able to provide cheap power, reliable power, and that are able to scale out. I'll leave that there.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I joked, but not joked about how nasty R. Kelly is. I hashtagged the Me Too movement. Can we talk a little bit more about what we discussed last week about women having an equal voice at the table? And, we talked about the fact that this isn't 1776, so taking that voice back and we talked about the merit-based system. That isn't really something that's feasible today. I saw an ad by Gillette recently. Shout out to Gillette. It was really well done, I thought. And despite the fact that it discouraged bullying and sexism and basically discouraged not being an asshole to people, there were still people that got mad about that. So we talked about fake outrage last week. There's always another side to everything. But can we talk a little bit more about how women and minorities and lower income, everybody, can try to secure an equal voice, or at least a louder voice at the table? The Me Too movement is a movement that, again, either people love, and I support it because, yeah, don't rape assholes. I don't think that's that hard. Don't be a dick to people. Or people hate it because they think it's threatening to, I don't know who. But how do people get in today's world an equal voice or a louder voice that can be heard at the table when it's so disproportionate when it comes to access? I'd love your thoughts on that, just to further our discussion from last week.
Oh God, Gerardo, this is above my pay grade. I've done just a bit of thinking on it, and two of the things, or a couple of things, it seems to me that could be done are thus. One is putting some sort of value on all the work that women do that isn't included in the economy. I'll put some links up underneath the video on this. And what I'm talking about is bringing or putting a value, a gross domestic product, including in the GDP, the laundry and the dishwashing and the child care, and just helping put a monetary value on it, so that makes it real. And I know that's not going to solve everything that you just asked about, but it's one of the pieces I think that could go a long way into really, because we talked about how things need to be merit-based, and women in some respects aren't getting that merit because it's not being quantified. I hope that makes sense. I'm not an expert on this topic. That was one thing. And another thing I've been reading about and is actually happening a bit here in Washington State when I leave is, and and this is a U.S. problem. Europe and other places have done some work on correcting this, but that's improving family leave when women have children. And what happens is, in a lot in the U.S. is you get what 6 weeks unpaid, 8 weeks unpaid. There's no standardized thing. Whereas in other countries, you're guaranteed not to lose your job. You get 8 weeks or more paid. And so there have been studies done on this. Again, I'll find one and put a link up. But that when career-oriented women that are in the workplace have a child or two or three, each child sets them back so much in their career trajectory because we don't have an adequate family leave policy in the United States. And I'll stop there because, again, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me those are two common sense things that we should work on. And they're going to get pushback. Here in Washington State, we had a family leave tax that came into effect this year, and it's another tax line item on my paycheck that gets taken out, but it goes to help I believe government workers and things like that have paid longer leave, and so we can start to rectify that problem. Not being a dick also goes a long way to help rectifying that problem. But I don't know, what do you got, Gerardo?
Lobbyist.
Okay.
You do what Congress does, right? I mean, you do what the most successful organizations in the world, and especially in this country, do, right? We have a Supreme Court that has said, Citizens United, that ruling basically said money is speech, right? And whenever you want to pass a bill or get exposure to an issue that is near and dear to you, what the influential people do, what the people that are well off do, is they go hire themselves a couple of lobbyists, influential lobbyists that can get it to the right people. I mean, most of the people in Congress aren't the brightest bulb in the box. They have 20-something-year-old staffers that write most of these bills, and there's a lot of lobbyists that, in a lot of cases, write the entire bill. So I don't like the system for what it is today, and I have 100 suggestions, like I do about everything else, right? That of how to change that. But the system we have today begs for organizations to rally together and go hire some lobbyists that know what they're doing and can get some change done. We had the conversation about the fourth turning and whether we felt optimistic about the future with the younger generation. You said you did. I said that I do. I'm hopeful that the change happens on multiple levels, right? I think it's good to want to change the system, but there can't be that exaggerated lag time between now and when that system is changed. We have to, as a society, I think, fight for the better things in between that change. And as pessimistic or gloomy as that sounds, that means exploiting the system that exists now. And it can't just be the dicks that get to exploit the system, right?
Yeah, there was a report out this week, again, link at the bottom. Why is Congress so dumb? And the answer, this was a Washington Post article.
Was it just one answer? Was it just one answer?
Well, essentially, it's that they now they take more money from lobbyists than they spend on doing their own research. So like you said, they got a 20-something-year-old staffer writing these bills, which used to be the case, but increasingly, like you just said, it's the lobbyist writing the bills. And so congressmen and women literally have no idea what's going on. So some examples in the piece were when Google was testifying to Congress, congressmen were asking them like how the iPhone worked. And when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying, they were asking him like if he was reading our emails. And so they just have no idea like what tech companies do what or who makes the iPhone even. And that's just like one example because they're literally fucking clueless.
Hashtag go get yourself a lobbyist, everybody. It doesn't take a lot to get the attention of these people up there, judging by their response to some pretty simple shit. So we're going to have to organize anybody that's for equality, anybody that is for, having a voice at the table. I read an interview earlier with both, actually, one with Ray Dalio and one with the gentleman from JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, and they talked about how wealth inequality should be a national emergency, right? Like 0.1% controls more than 90% of the bottom 90%. I mean, the bottom line is, I am all for capitalism. I am a capitalist at heart. I believe if you produce, you should receive the rewards of that production. But we upward mobility is a serious issue, and that's not just in this country. It's everywhere, and it's not that way by accident, everybody. I mean, there is a difference between rewarding hard work and innovation and like basically telling 90-something% of the world to go fuck themselves, that no matter what they do, they're not going to have any upward mobility. So again, I'm all for changing the system. I hope I see it in my lifetime, but in the meantime, we got to work within it a little bit to get, to amplify the voices. So any other thoughts on that, Nick?
Let's get our yellow vests.
Hey, they stopped that gas tax, didn't they?
Oh, Macron is penning 2,500-word articles in major French newspapers asking which taxes we should eliminate and if there's too much bureaucracy. So, yeah, they got some attention for sure.
Yeah, and it only took about a month or so of breaking shit and beating cops up. I'm not advocating that we beat cops up, and I'm not advocating that we break shit, but I remember his initial stance. He was on vacation, and he said there's no way that he's bowing down, I think was the word that he used, and it didn't take too long.
Hey, you spray paint the Arc de Triomphe and people pay attention.
Ah, you pronounced that so well, Nick. I told you, you're the smart one on the podcast. I love it. I love it. Speaking of government, another funny, we talked El Chapo last week. I talked about my funny, not funny kidnap story and government corruption in Mexico. So more testimony from the trial. I don't know if you saw, but a couple of people now have testified that ex-president was bribed $100 million. And,
just a small sum?
Just a small sum. And that was just one payment, right? And so it was funny to me that people were appalled. I saw the reaction on Twitter, and I saw some of the discussion on Spanish network television. And the only people not appalled are people that have any exposure or have family members or live in Mexico. Everybody in Mexico, again, knows exactly how this works. I've been, in Zacatecas when I see the change of power happen. It literally is 20, 30 trucks, tanks, people in hoods that come in and go talk to the local military and say, you're being replaced, you've been relieved. And they say, give us 3 days and we're going to kill all the bad guys that were here before. We're the new bad guys, and this is how it's going to go.
You know much more about this than I do. I've heard your stories about changes of power in towns and who are the good bad guys and who are the bad guys. And I'm just going to let you go on this topic because you've got family there and you're the Mexican American and you've got a direct line on what's going on. So
yeah, I mean, my point, I won't drag it on too far. My point is that it's appalling to me that anybody is surprised that this level of corruption has been going on. It's been going on for generations, and not just in Mexico, except in Mexico, there's a structure to it. And anybody that lives there is exposed to it. So the fact that this is like blockbuster testimony, according to American sources, gets under my skin a little bit. Just like when people say, well, my friend just went to Cabo and they had such a good time. I don't know why everybody says it's so bad in Mexico.
Right.
Yes,
well, we talked last week about there being cocaine on Pemex oil tankers, and so, like you say, it's shocking to those who don't know what's going on, but clearly it's been entrenched for a long time. And look at the guy whose trial this is coming out at. This is a guy that basically waltzed out of a couple of prisons. I mean, that doesn't just happen. Come on, how blinded can you be?
Yeah,
or
I
naive.
Everybody should travel more. Do it safely, but everybody should travel more. I'll leave it at that. Let me pivot a little bit. Switch gears. Have you seen the Bird Box movie? That's been all over the place.
Gosh, I'm the only one that hasn't. I'll tell you what, Gerardo, I couldn't tell you the last entire movie or TV show I've seen for that matter, but I've seen it on the group text with my college and high school buddies. They've all watched it, but I have not seen it, no.
You want to hear a joke that got me in trouble with my wife?
Sure.
I told her we should go to a strip club and do the Bird Box challenge.
Just wear the bandanas. Try to feel your way around.
Boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. Those that have seen the movie, you'll get it. Anyway, let's move on. What else you got for me, Nick? I had an extra coffee today, folks. My apologies in advance.
I want to be the interesting story man at the end, so I got two interesting stories I want to share. But before I do that, I had a question for you. You and I have been talking recently a bit about real estate and rates and if it's a good time to buy. And you know much more about real estate than I do. You own some commercial properties and you've bought and sold much more real estate than I have. Any insight on where we're at as it comes to the housing cycle and rates and if people should be looking or investing?
You know, I think people should always look for deals, right? Real estate is like crime, like organized crime in Mexico. It's local. You know, what happens in Veracruz isn't happening in Juarez, isn't happening in Zacatecas. It's different crime. It's different groups. It's different structures. And real estate is very much like that. You really have to have your finger on the pulse. You know, you're in Washington State. I'm in Texas. Those are two regions that are seeing economies grow, that are low tax havens, that are benefiting from a ton of Californians leaving because they're sick of being taxed to death. So if you were in California looking for real estate, I would encourage you to really know what you're doing because the numbers don't look so hot. If you're in Austin, Texas, like I am, or in Washington, like you are, where you have, 35% of Californians moving to get away from these high tax states, I would say there's probably some good deals to be had, especially in light of the fact that we're like a percentage point away from 6,000-year lows in interest rates, right? I mean, money is still very, very cheap out there. And so it's really local. I would encourage everybody to speak with somebody that's familiar with the area that they're in. But I think, there's that old saying in the real estate business, the deal of the decade comes along every week if you're looking. And I think you just have to look. I always encourage in the long term having a real estate basket. It's something that I've practiced and it has been very, very good to me. So that's my short take on that.
I'm always looking.
I like it. What else do you got for me? You shared the story last week of the whale singing. My kids loved it. I had some good feedback. Everybody was interested. You have any feel-good stories this week? We got a dumbass Congress. We got R. Kelly out here allegedly raping and molesting and doing all sorts of nasty things to people. You have companies that are not being very nice to their own shareholders that write them checks. Any good stuff out there?
I got two interesting stories. I don't know how good they are, but one is there was this meteorite that landed in 2007. It weighed a couple of tons, and Wired magazine has done this very long expose about these meteorite chasers that have gone to find it and how these guys hop around the globe and find moon rocks and how this rock was making people sick in the Bolivia high plains where it landed, and it exposed corruption with local police officers and how these people were trying to get the meteorites and just a very, very interesting story to read. And I thought, from a miner's investing perspective, very interesting because it deals with high price rocks, commodities that people are trying to find, and also dealing with jurisdictional risk. I mean, these guys are finding this stuff in Libya and Oman and the Arabian Peninsula and Bolivia. And so same as finding a gold deposit in some far-flung, not so friendly place. So check out the meteorite story. And then something that just completely blew my mind this week is I guess recently in the past 2 years, this is another space thing, and I'm not really a space guy, so I don't know why I was so interested in this, but there was this well, we don't know what it was, this giant thing out in space that came into our solar system, and we don't know why or how. But a Harvard professor, who obviously knows much more about these things than I do, is positing that it was a UFO sent by an intelligent life form. So there you go.
Should we take him more seriously because he's a Harvard professor?
I mean, you kind of got to. I mean, he's got the track record and the history of publishing, and he's done the math. You know, I can't do it justice, but he's done the math on how this thing got to the solar system, and it would have taken it 600,000 years, except it put itself in a special place so that our solar system would run into it, so it didn't have to come to us. And anyway, it was just crazy, man. You got Harvard professors saying there's aliens, so check it out.
Interesting. You want to hear something that made me laugh that I don't think he thinks is funny, but I was like, come on, man. You remember the Chris Hansen guy? He used to catch all the creeps. He would like interview them, and like, you know, he'd be like creepy guys like hitting on young girls, underage girls, like child molesters and rapists, and he would barge in with the cameras and catch them, and like that was the episode.
To Catch a Predator.
Yeah, To Catch a Predator. You remember? Well, Chris Hansen got caught bouncing checks and he got arrested recently.
Oh,
this
goodness.
guy literally had one job in his whole life, was to never get caught for doing anything stupid. And he gets caught bouncing checks on TMZ and he gets himself arrested. I thought that was funny. Just, you know, somewhat dumb ironic, but yeah, he had one job, man.
Thank goodness it wasn't soliciting underage girls. That's bad enough as it is, but if Chris Hansen did it, that's a whole new level. So glad as I can be that it was just bouncing chicks.
Yes, absolutely. All right, it's been almost an hour, Nick. What else do you got? What are you listening to nowadays? I know we haven't talked music on this podcast yet. Anything that you're fond of right now that gets you through a day? Anybody you've seen live recently?
You're going to laugh at me, Gerardo.
Okay, I'm laughing already. Yeah.
Music is like movies with me. I don't do new music. I don't do new films. Honestly, the last movie I went to see in the theater, I think, was Sex and the City 2, maybe like 15 years ago, and it's because my wife drugged me there. And it's the same with modern music and mumble rappers, and I don't even know what's going on out there. So, and I work at home, so I'm not in the car that much. But when I do get in the car, I'm either turning on classic rock, you know, the 60s and 70s stuff, or I'm listening to some, well, I guess what you would call alternative country, not things that they play on the radio, but things like Sturgill Simpson and Chris Stapleton and some of the alternative country stuff. But that's where I'm at. How about you? R. Kelly?
No, not R. Kelly. R. Kelly is canceled, Nick. We talked about this. No, all jokes aside, listen, my wife and I had the pleasure. We're music geeks. We're actually movie geeks as well. But we had the pleasure of seeing a young lady from your neck of the woods, from Maryland, from a place I'm not familiar with, Easton, Maryland.
Okay.
And so she's from Easton, Maryland. Her name is Maggie Rogers. She has got a debut album. Actually, I think it debuts here in a couple of days or just debuted. It's called Heard It in a Past Life. We obviously were privy to a good bulk of that album at the performance that we saw her at a couple of months ago. And I think this young lady is going to be an absolute star. It's really folksy, dancey, electronic, alternative, kind of popish. It's very, very different than anything that's out there right now. And I think she's just absolutely fascinating. I encourage you. That'll be your task for the week. You can go, I guess people don't buy albums anymore, right? You can stream the new Maggie Rogers Heard It in a Past Life album. I encourage everybody to do it. It's a feel-good album. It's really good stuff. I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm excited for Miss Maggie. There's good people on the eastern shore of Maryland. I'll have to check it out. And no, people don't buy albums anymore. Here's another link I'll throw up. But I think the number one record on Billboard or whoever tracks that last week had sold less than 1,000 albums. So yeah, you can be number one and sell less than 1,000 albums. Maybe we should become music artists.
Ouch. You know what else we should talk about? A company that did a good thing recently. Great Bear Resources. They had some amazing drill results recently. And, you know, this is a company that got up over $3 and then it got under $2 and now it's back up near $3. But they just drilled, I think, 1,600 grams per ton gold over something like 0.7 meters. at 150 meters depth at the Dixie Project. That's 51.29 ounces per ton over 2.3 feet. It's a massive hit. It's a massive hit following some incredible results. And so we talked about some of the companies that aren't executing and that are missing, and some of them that are outright ripping off their shareholders. I thought it's probably a good thing to end the podcast by highlighting somebody that I think is doing it really, really well. Chris Taylor over there is a smart young guy that clearly has a passion for the business, has done right by his shareholders, has secured some large institutional interest, has got the backing of some of the better names in the space. So kudos to Great Bear. It's not all bad out there, everybody.
I don't follow GBR, but that press release was unavoidable. I obviously read it. And yeah, kudos to him. I saw they're hosting a webinar to show sort of the geologic model and what they're seeing and how they want to advance it. And I think that's very smart and something other companies should take note of.
Those that know me know I am a huge Cub fan. I mentioned earlier I grew up in Chicago. I am on my way to Chicago for the Cubs convention. If anybody is there, reach out. Nick, you are on your way to actually get work done like a productive adult. I know you'll be speaking here soon. You'll be in Canada. Where can people link up with you?
Oh yeah, I should really make a presentation. I speak Saturday at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, and I'll get to be accosted by a bunch of people who want me to write about their company. It'll be a good time. I'm talking about how to invest in gold. And actually, this ties it full circle. So I've had a couple of estranged buddies hit me up in the past week to say, what do you mean buy gold? Sort of like when people were asking how to buy crypto or whatever. But what do you mean buy gold? You mean buy bars? You mean buy stocks? What do you mean? And so that's what I'm going to present on. What do I mean when I say buy gold?
All right. And where's this going to be?
It's at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference put on by Cambridge in the Vancouver Convention Center Sunday and Monday, the 20th and 21st, I believe it is.
Perfect. Here's a useful tidbit, or maybe not. Maybe you already knew this, or maybe it's not useful at all. Did you know gold is at an all-time high in 72 currencies right now?
I did not know in that many currencies, but I have looked at it in Canadian dollars. And yeah, no, it's easy to see how it could soon happen in U.S. dollars. In fact, the U.S. is the only dollars it's not happening in, it sounds like.
There you go. There you go. Mr. Hodge, thank you. Appreciate it.
Safe travels.
Thanks, everybody, for dealing with us. I get the feeling if we keep highlighting the bullshit, you're going to have less companies approaching you at these conferences. Just saying.
Well, it might be a nice thing.
Episode 2 of Bizarro World, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.